The pen felt heavier than it should have. 23 pages of legal documents spread across the mahogany table, and all I had to do was sign my name on the dotted lines. Tessa Willis, former wife, future... What exactly? "Take your time," my lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "This is a big moment. Big moment, right. The biggest moment of my life was supposed to be my wedding day 5 years ago. Instead, it turned out to be the beginning of the longest, most soul-crushing chapter I'd ever lived through. "I'm ready," I said, gripping the pen. "My name is Tessa, and today I'm signing myself back to life." The first signature went on page 3, dissolution of marriage. Check. Jerome had fought me on everything, the house, the car, even the coffee maker we got as a wedding gift. But his lawyer knew what mine knew. Emotional abuse leaves marks that don't show up in photographs, but they show up in bank statements, therapy bills, and the way a woman flinches when someone raises their voice. Page 7. Asset division. Check. "The settlement amount is final," my lawyer confirmed. $150,000. It should hit your account within 3 business days. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. $150,000? It wasn't just money, it was validation. Proof that what I'd endured had value, that my pain had worth, that the years I'd spent walking on eggshells and apologizing for existing meant something tangible. Page 12. Spousal support waived. Check. I didn't want his monthly payments. I wanted clean. I wanted gone. I wanted to never have to see his name on another document for the rest of my life. "You sure about waiving the alimony?" my lawyer asked. "With his income, you could be looking at—" "I'm sure." The words came out sharper than I intended. "I don't want anything from him except out." Page 18. Custody arrangements not applicable. Check. That one stung differently. We'd tried for kids early in the marriage, back when I still believed his promises about changing, about being better, about loving me the way I deserved. The miscarriage in year 2 had broken something in both of us, but where I grieved, Jerome blamed. Where I sought comfort, he found fault. "You're too stressed," he'd said after the doctor delivered the news. "Maybe if you weren't so high-strung all the time." Even our loss became my failure. Page 23, final signature. I wrote my name with deliberate care, each letter a small act of rebellion. Tessa Willis, not Tessa Matthews. Never again Tessa Matthews. "Congratulations," my lawyer said, gathering the papers. "You're officially divorced." I walked out of that office feeling like I was floating. The October air hit my face, crisp and clean, and for the first time in years I could breathe without measuring each inhale. My phone buzzed. A text from Lisa, my best friend since college, and the only person who'd stuck around through the worst of it. "How'd it go?" "Drinks tonight to celebrate," I typed back quickly. "It's done." And yes, definitely drinks. 3 days later, I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment, the only place I could afford after Jerome kept the house, refreshing my banking app like a teenager waiting for exam results. The page loaded. Available balance $47.23. I refreshed again. Same number. My hands started shaking. I called the bank, navigating through automated menus with growing panic. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I show a wire transfer of $149,700 processed yesterday morning. The receiving account is registered to Meredith Willis." The phone slipped from my hand. Meredith Willis, my mother. I called her immediately, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Oh, Tessa, sweetie." Her voice was bright, cheerful, completely unbothered. "I was wondering when you'd notice." "Mom, what did you do?" I helped Riley, of course. "The wedding is in 6 weeks, and you know how expensive these things are. She needed the money more than you did. Riley, my younger sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. That was my divorce settlement, my money. Honey, what were you going to do with it anyway? Waste it on therapy? Buy yourself some sad little apartment. This way, it's going towards something beautiful, something meaningful. Riley's wedding is going to be perfect. The line went quiet except for my ragged breathing. Besides, she continued, her voice dropping to that familiar tone of casual cruelty, what were you planning to do? Find someone new? Start over? Sweetheart, let's be realistic here. You don't deserve love, not after what you put Jerome through. The call ended. I sat there in the silence of my studio apartment, staring at my phone screen, and felt something shift inside me. Something cold and sharp and absolutely certain. They'd taken my money, my fresh start, my validation, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated exactly how much I'd learned about revenge during 5 years of marriage to a master manipulator. I drove to my mother's house the next morning, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The Colonial sat pristine behind its manicured lawn, every shrub perfectly trimmed, every flower bed colour coordinated. Image was everything to Meredith, always had been. Riley's car was in the driveway. Of course it was. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. I wasn't family anymore. I was a creditor. Tessa? Riley opened the door with a bright smile, like she hadn't just stolen my entire future. Mum said you might stop by. Come in, come in. I was just showing her my dress options. She looked radiant. 29 years old, blonde highlights fresh from the salon, engagement ring catching the morning light. Everything I used to be before Jerome ground me down to nothing. Where's Mum? Kitchen. She's making her famous scones for the wedding tasting later. Riley grabbed my arm. Oh, you have to see the venue photos. It's going to be absolutely magical. She dragged me through the house I'd grown up in, past family photos where I appeared less and less frequently over the years, until I was basically edited out entirely. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter. Meredith stood at the counter, wearing her favourite apron, the one that said, "World's Best Mom," that Riley had given her last Mother's Day. Tessa, sweetheart, she didn't look up from her mixing bowl. I was hoping you'd come by. We need to talk about your attitude yesterday. My attitude? The way you spoke to me on the phone, very disrespectful. She finally turned around, flour dusting her hands. I raised you better than that. Riley perched on a bar stool, scrolling through her phone. Mum, show her the cake design. It's going to be 4 tiers with real gold leaf. Riley, that's beautiful, Meredith cooed. You deserve nothing but the best. I stood there watching them, these 2 women who shared my DNA but felt like strangers. I want my money back. The kitchen went quiet except for the timer ticking on the oven. Excuse me? Meredith's voice went ice cold. $150,000. My divorce settlement. I want it back. Riley looked up from her phone for the first time. Tessa, don't be dramatic. It's just money. Just money? I laughed, but there was no humour in it. That money was supposed to help me rebuild my life, get therapy, find a decent place to live, maybe even start over. Start over? Meredith set down her mixing bowl with a sharp clink. Honey, you're 34 years old. You had your chance. You married Jerome and you ruined it. You drove that poor man away with your constant neediness, your depression, your... He cheated on me, Mum, multiple times, because you weren't giving him what he needed at home. The words hit like a slap. Riley kept scrolling through her phone, completely unbothered by the conversation happening around her. Besides, Meredith continued, what kind of fresh start were you really going to have? You think some man is going to want damaged goods? You think you're going to find love again? She laughed, actually laughed. Sweetheart, let's be honest here. You don't deserve love, not after the way you handled your marriage. And Riley does. Riley is beautiful. Riley is successful. Riley knows how to make a man happy. Meredith gestured toward my sister like she was presenting a prize. Look at her engagement ring. Look at how radiant she is. That's what love looks like. Riley held up her hand, admiring the 2-carat diamond. David proposed on the beach in Malibu. It was like something out of a movie. "Who's David?" I asked. Riley and Meredith exchanged a look. "Her fiancé, obviously," Meredith said. "I thought his name was Michael." Another look. "It is Michael," Riley said quickly. "David that's just what I call him sometimes. Pet name." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Where is he? Your fiancé?" "He's busy with work. Big client meeting today." Riley's voice was getting higher, the way it always did when she lied. "Actually, Jerome is helping me with some of the wedding planning. You know how good he is with logistics." Jerome, my ex-husband, helping plan my sister's wedding, with my money. "How long has Jerome been helping you?" "Just recently," Riley said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "He offered after he heard about the engagement. He's really good at vendor negotiations." Meredith nodded approvingly. "It's so nice that you two can be mature about everything. Jerome always was such a good man." The timer went off. Meredith pulled her scones from the oven, humming softly like we were having a perfectly normal family conversation. "I remember when you were little," she said, arranging the scones on a cooling rack. "You used to throw these terrible tantrums when Riley got something you wanted. Toys, clothes, attention. You'd scream and cry until your father gave in just to shut you up. Mum. But Riley never did that. Riley was always grateful for what she had, always appreciative." She smiled at my sister. "That's why good things happen to people like Riley. The universe rewards gratitude." I looked at them both, my mother with her flower-dusted apron and satisfied smile, my sister with her diamond ring and designer clothes bought with my stolen money, and felt something crystallize inside me. "You're right," I said quietly. "Riley does deserve the best." They both looked surprised by my sudden agreement. "I'm going to make sure she gets exactly what she deserves." I walked out of that kitchen, past the family photos that had erased me, through the front door of the house where I'd learned that love was conditional and I'd never met the conditions. My phone rang as I reached my car. "Lisa, how did it go?" "They took my money," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Now I'm going to take their moment." "What do you mean?" I started the engine, looking back at the perfect house with its perfect lawn and its perfectly rotten occupants. "I mean, it's time for Riley to have the wedding of her dreams." The coffee shop on 5th Street buzzed with the usual morning crowd, but I'd chosen the corner table for privacy. Eliana arrived exactly on time. She always did. 45 years old, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a sleek bun, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my rent. "You sounded urgent on the phone," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Everything okay?" For the past year, I'd been the anonymous co-founder of Rise Her, Eliana's women's empowerment platform. What started as freelance marketing work had evolved into something bigger. I was the voice behind our most viral content, the strategist behind our growth from 10,000 to 2 million followers. But Eliana didn't know about Jerome, about the divorce, about my family stealing my settlement. "I have a proposition," I said. "Remember that televised wedding project you've been planning?" Her eyes lit up. The empowerment finale. One bride walking herself down the aisle, showing women they don't need anyone else's validation to claim their happiness. "I want to be that bride." Eliana nearly choked on her latte. "You? But you just got divorced, and you've never mentioned dating anyone." "I am dating someone. Finn. We've been together 6 months. That part was true. Finn was patient, kind, everything Jerome wasn't. "And I want our wedding to be the statement piece for Risa." Tessa, this would be huge. National television, celebrity guests, major sponsors. Are you sure you're ready for that level of exposure? I pulled out my phone, showing her Riley's Instagram. "My sister is getting married the same weekend you planned the televised event. Look at this." Eliana scrolled through the posts. Riley in wedding dress fittings. Riley taste testing cakes. Riley showing off venue decorations with the caption, "Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy the perfect wedding." Let blessed time dreams come true. "She's using my divorce settlement to fund it," I said quietly. Eliana looked up sharply. "What?" "My mother stole my settlement money, gave it to Riley for her wedding. $150,000. That's theft. Family theft, harder to prosecute." I took a sip of my coffee, keeping my voice steady. "But here's the thing. Riley's wedding is November 15th. Your televised event was scheduled for November 15th. Understanding dawned in Eliana's eyes. "You want to upstage your sister's wedding." "I want to show the world what empowerment really looks like. A woman who lost everything, building herself back up, claiming her joy on her own terms." I leaned forward. "Think about the story, Eliana, the narrative power. A bride who walks herself down the aisle because she learned she's the only person she can truly count on." Eliana was quiet for a long moment, her business mind clearly working. "The publicity would be incredible. The message is perfect for our brand." "I've already scouted venues. There's a clifftop location in Mendocino overlooking the ocean." "Intimate, elegant, everything Riley's gaudy ballroom isn't." "You've thought this through." "I've had time to think." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her calendar. "The production team is already booked for November 15th. We have celebrity speakers lined up, major media coverage confirmed." She looked up at me. "But Tessa, this isn't just about revenge, is it? You genuinely want to marry Finn." "I love him. He knows about my family, about Jerome, about everything. He supports this completely." That was also true. Finn had held me while I cried about the stolen money, had helped me research legal options, had been the one to suggest I channel my anger into something positive. "What about your family? Won't they be upset about the timing?" I smiled for the first time all week. "I'm sure they'll find a way to watch both events." Eliana laughed despite herself. "You're diabolical. I respect that." She extended her hand across the table. "Let's do it." "But I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want to walk you down the aisle. If this is about women supporting women, about chosen family over blood family, then let me be your family that day." Something tight in my chest loosened. "You'd do that?" "Honey, I've been in business for 20 years. I've seen women tear each other down more times than I can count. But I've also seen them lift each other up in ways that change everything." She squeezed my hand. "Let me lift you up." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Now," Eliana said, pulling out her tablet, "let's talk logistics. We'll need to move fast. Venue, catering, flowers, dress, media coordination." "I've already put a deposit on the venue." She raised an eyebrow. "When?" "Yesterday, right after I left my mother's house." "And Finn's okay with the timeline?" "He said he'd marry me tomorrow if I wanted. The only thing that matters to him is that I'm happy." Eliana smiled. "I like him already." She started typing notes. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. Small guest list, maybe 50 people max. Intimate ceremony, but with full media coverage. We'll live stream it, get our celebrity ambassadors involved, make it the most watched empowerment event of the year." "What about Riley's wedding?" "What about it?" Eliana's smile turned sharp. "I'm sure it'll be lovely, but ours will be legendary." My phone buzzed. A text from Riley. "Mum wants to know if you're coming to the final dress fitting tomorrow. Family bonding time." I showed the message to Eliana. "Are you going?" "Oh yes," I said, typing back a cheerful response. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Eliana gathered her things, standing to leave. "Tessa?" "Yeah?" "Your sister has no idea what's coming, does she?" I thought about Riley scrolling through her phone while my mother explained why I didn't deserve love, about Jerome helping plan a wedding funded by my stolen money, About a lifetime of being invisible while my sister sparkled. None whatsoever. The bridal boutique smelled like expensive perfume and desperation. Riley stood on the platform in front of 3 mirrors, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. The beading caught the light with every movement, creating tiny rainbows across the white walls. "It's perfect," Meredith gushed, circling Riley like a predator admiring its prey. "Absolutely perfect. You look like a princess." "I feel like one too," Riley said, smoothing the silk. "The train is exactly what I wanted." Long enough to make a statement. I sat in the corner chair, sipping champagne I didn't want, playing the role of supportive sister. My phone was recording everything, tucked discreetly in my purse with the camera lens barely visible. "Tessa, what do you think?" Riley asked, striking a pose. "Be honest." "You look beautiful," I said, and meant it. Riley had always been beautiful. That was never the problem. "The alterations will be ready by next Friday," the seamstress said, pinning the hem. "Just in time for your big day." "Speaking of which," Meredith said, settling into the chair beside me, "we need to talk about the final payments. The caterer wants another 10,000 by Monday, and the florist is asking for 15. "That's fine," Riley said, admiring herself in the mirror. "Just transfer it from the account." "What account?" I asked casually. Meredith and Riley exchanged a look in the mirror. "The wedding account," Meredith said carefully. "We set up a special account for all the wedding expenses." "With my money." "With the family money," Meredith corrected. "Money that's being put to good use instead of being wasted on whatever it was you were planning to waste it on." The seamstress looked uncomfortable, pretending to focus intensely on her pins. "Mum," Riley said quietly, "maybe we shouldn't—" "Shouldn't what? Tell the truth?" Meredith's voice rose slightly. "Tessa, you act like we stole from you, but let's be realistic. You got that money because your marriage failed, because you couldn't keep your husband happy. At least this way, something good comes from your failure." I kept my expression neutral, but my phone kept recording. "Besides," Meredith continued, warming to her theme, "it's not like the money was legally yours anyway. Technically, I'm still listed as your emergency contact at the bank, from when you were going through all that unpleasantness with Jerome. The wire transfer was completely legitimate." There it was, the confession I needed. "You used my emergency contact information to steal my settlement?" "I used my access to help my daughter. There's a difference." Meredith stood up, smoothing her skirt. "And frankly, I'm tired of your attitude about this. Riley is getting married. This is supposed to be a happy time. Stop trying to ruin it with your jealousy." "I'm not jealous," I said quietly. "Of course you are. You've always been jealous of Riley, ever since you were children." Meredith walked over to the platform, adjusting Riley's veil. "Remember when Riley got the lead in the school play? Tessa threw such a fit that your father had to take her home early. I was 8 years old, Mom. Age doesn't excuse bad behaviour, and look how it turned out. Riley went on to star in 3 more productions that year. Success breeds success." Riley shifted uncomfortably on the platform. "Mum, maybe we should focus on the dress." "No, this needs to be said." Meredith turned back to me. "You've spent your whole life expecting things to be handed to you, Tessa, but that's not how the world works. People like Riley earn their happiness. They work for it. They deserve it. And people like me don't. People like you make choices, bad choices. You chose Jerome, even though I warned you he was too good for you. You chose to stay in that marriage when it was clearly failing. You chose to be bitter instead of grateful." She gestured around the boutique. "Look where your choices got you, divorced, alone, living in that sad little apartment." The seamstress cleared her throat. "Perhaps I should give you ladies some privacy." "That's not necessary," I said, standing up. I was just leaving anyway. I walked over to Riley, still standing on the platform in her princess dress. You really do look beautiful, I said, kissing her cheek. I hope your wedding day is everything you've dreamed of. Tessa, I mean it. I hope it's absolutely unforgettable. I headed for the door, then paused, turning back to Meredith. Mum, just out of curiosity, when you transferred my money, did you use your own bank login or mine? What kind of question is that? A legal one. Because using someone else's banking information without permission, even with emergency access, can be considered wire fraud if the amounts are large enough. Meredith's face went pale. You wouldn't! Wouldn't what? Pursue legal action against my own mother? I smiled sweetly. You're right, I probably wouldn't. Family is family after all. I left them there, Riley frozen on her platform, Meredith clutching her pearls, the seamstress pretending she hadn't heard any of it. In my car, I stopped the recording and immediately sent it to Lisa with a text. Evidence secured, phase 1 complete. She texted back immediately. Holy shit, your mum actually admitted to wire fraud on tape. She admitted to a lot more than that. My phone rang. Lisa. Are you okay? That was brutal to listen to. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I started the engine. I have therapy in an hour, then my self-defense class. Self-defense? Something I started after the divorce. Turns out learning to fight back is incredibly therapeutic. Tessa, what are you planning? I thought about Riley in her perfect dress, about Meredith's satisfied smile, about Jerome somewhere in the background pulling strings. I'm planning to give them exactly what they deserve. Which is? The wedding of the century, one they'll never ever forget. I hung up and drove toward my therapist's office, the recording safely backed up to 3 different cloud accounts. Tomorrow I'd file the legal paperwork, but tonight I had a wedding to plan, my own. The courthouse steps were cold under my feet as I walked out with the legal papers tucked under my arm. The injunction was official. All payments from the stolen settlement account were frozen pending investigation. I had 48 hours before Riley's wedding and the clock was ticking. My phone buzzed. Finn. How did it go? The judge signed off on everything. The account is locked. And you're sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back. I looked up at the grey November sky, thinking about Riley's dress, Meredith's smug smile, Jerome's helping hands. I've never been more sure of anything. Then let's get married. The Mendocino venue was everything I'd dreamed of. Clifftop views, ocean breeze, intimate garden setting. Eliana arrived with her production crew at noon, transforming the space into something magical. White roses everywhere, fairy lights strung between the trees, a simple archway overlooking the Pacific. The livestream setup is ready, she said, adjusting her earpiece. We're expecting over 1 million viewers. The celebrity speakers land in 2 hours. Any word from the other wedding? Lisa appeared at my elbow, grinning wickedly. Oh, you're going to love this. I've been monitoring their vendor group chat all morning. She showed me her phone. Screenshots of increasingly frantic messages. Florist, payment declined, needs certified check by 3 p.m. or no flowers. Caterer, account frozen, cannot proceed without cash payment. Venue coordinator, legal notice received, deposit in dispute. Please contact immediately. And the best part, Lisa continued, scrolling down, Jerome just got fired. I looked up sharply. What? Anonymous tip to his company about workplace harassment. Apparently someone sent them detailed documentation of his behaviour patterns, including recorded conversations with former colleagues. Lisa's smile was pure evil. Funny how these things work out. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Tessa, it's Riley. Her voice was shaky, higher than usual. We need to talk. I'm kind of busy today, Riley. It's my wedding day. Silence on the other end. Your what? My wedding. To Finn. Remember Finn? The man who actually loves me? Tessa, this isn't funny. The vendors are all asking for cash payments. The venue is threatening to cancel. Mum is having a panic attack. That sounds stressful. Don't play games with me. Did you do something to the account? I walked to the edge of the cliff, looking out at the ocean. The production crew was setting up cameras behind me, but I ignored them. I filed a legal injunction regarding the theft of my divorce settlement. The court agreed that the money was obtained illegally and froze the account pending investigation. You can't do this. My wedding is tomorrow. So is mine. Funny coincidence. Riley's voice cracked. Tessa, please, I'm begging you. This is my dream wedding. I've planned everything perfectly. With my money. It's just money, but this is my life, my happiness, Your what? Your chance to be the centre of attention? Your opportunity to prove you're the favourite daughter? Your moment to show everyone how much more you deserve than me? The line went quiet except for Riley's ragged breathing. I never said that. You didn't have to. Mum said it for you, multiple times. In fact, she said it so clearly that I have it recorded. You recorded us? I recorded a confession of wire fraud, actually. Very helpful for legal proceedings. Another silence. What do you want? Riley's voice was barely a whisper. I want you to have exactly the wedding you deserve. The one you planned with stolen money, enabled by a mother who thinks I'm worthless, assisted by my abusive ex-husband. I paused, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. I want you to experience what it feels like when everything falls apart and there's no one there to catch you. Tessa! I hung up. Eliana appeared beside me. Everything okay? Perfect. How's the setup going? Beautifully. The celebrity guests are arriving now. Sadie just got here. She's so excited to speak at your ceremony. Sadie was one of the women I'd mentored through Rise Her, helping her escape an abusive marriage and rebuild her life. She'd insisted on flying in from Chicago to be part of the ceremony. And the media coverage. Beyond our wildest dreams, 3 major networks, dozens of online platforms, international interest. This is going to be the most watched empowerment event in Rise Her history. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. This is Jerome. We need to talk. I showed it to Lisa. Want me to handle it? No, I've got this. I called the number. Tessa, thank God. Listen, I know things ended badly between us, but Riley is family now. You can't destroy her wedding over our issues. Family? I laughed. Jerome, you cheated on me with my sister while we were married. You helped my mother steal my settlement money. You're helping plan a wedding funded by theft. What part of that sounds like family to you? I never cheated with Riley. We were just friends. Save it. I really don't care anymore. Then why are you doing this? I looked around at my wedding venue, elegant, intimate, real, everything Riley's gaudy spectacle wasn't. Because you all taught me something important. You taught me that the only person I can count on is myself. So today I'm marrying the man I love, surrounded by people who actually care about me, celebrating the life I built after you tried to destroy me. And Riley's wedding? What about it? You're ruining it. No, Jerome, I'm just not paying for it anymore. I hung up and turned off my phone. Eliana handed me a glass of champagne. Ready to get married? I looked at the sunset beginning to paint the sky pink and gold, at the cameras ready to broadcast my happiness to the world, at the life I'd built from the ashes of everything they'd tried to take from me. I've been ready for months. In 3 hours, Riley's dream wedding would crumble. In 2 hours, mine would begin. The makeup artist put the finishing touches on my eyes as my phone lit up with notifications I was ignoring. Through the bridal suite window, I could see guests arriving. Finn's family, my college friends, colleagues from Rise Her, women I'd mentored through the platform. Real people who actually cared about me. You look absolutely radiant, the artist said, stepping back. Are you ready to see? I turned toward the mirror and barely recognized myself. The dress was simple but elegant, off-the-shoulder silk that flowed like water, nothing like Riley's beaded monstrosity. My hair was swept up with small white flowers tucked behind one ear. I looked like myself, but the best version I'd ever been. "It's perfect," I whispered. Lisa burst through the door, phone in hand, grinning like a maniac. "You need to see this. Riley just posted on Instagram." She showed me the screen, a photo of Riley in her wedding dress, but she was crying. The caption read, "When everything falls apart on your wedding day, but you still believe in love. Wedding disaster. Still fighting, Psalm, pray for us." "The comments are brutal," Lisa said, scrolling down. "People are asking what happened. Someone leaked that the vendors all bailed. Another person said they heard the groom is missing." Missing? Apparently Michael, hasn't been seen since this morning. Word is he got fired yesterday and had some kind of breakdown. A knock on the door interrupted us. Eliana peeked in, wearing a stunning navy dress. "It's time." "The cameras are rolling, the live stream has over 2 million viewers, and your groom is waiting at the altar, looking like the luckiest man alive." I stood up, smoothing my dress. "I'm ready." "Wait." Eliana pulled out her phone. "You might want to see this first. It's trending on social media." She showed me a split screen someone had created. On the left, Riley's crying Instagram post from her empty ballroom, and on the right, a preview shot of my cliff-top ceremony with the caption, "2 sisters, 2 weddings, same day. One paid for with stolen money, one paid for with self-respect. Guess which one is actually happening? How did people find out about Riley using your money?" Lisa raised her hand sheepishly. "I may have shared some information with a few gossip accounts, anonymously, of course." The 3 of us walked toward the ceremony space. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting everything golden. 50 guests stood as the music began. Not the traditional wedding march, but Stronger by Kelly Clarkson. My choice. Finn stood at the altar in a simple black suit, his face lighting up when he saw me. Beside him, the officiant waited with a warm smile. The celebrity speakers from RiseHer sat in the front row, along with Sadie, who was wiping away tears. Eliana took my arm. "Ready to walk into your new life?" "I've been walking toward it for months." We started down the aisle. The cameras captured every step, broadcasting live to millions of viewers. I could see the comments streaming on the production monitors. "She's glowing." "This is what empowerment looks like." "Queen energy." Halfway down the aisle, my phone buzzed in my bouquet. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. A text from Meredith. "Please stop this. Riley is having a breakdown. The wedding is ruined. People are laughing at us. Please, I'm begging you." I showed the message to Eliana without breaking stride. "Want to respond?" "No need. She'll figure it out soon enough." We reached the altar. Eliana kissed my cheek and whispered, "You did it. You're free." Finn took my hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen!" The officiant began the ceremony. "We're gathered here today to celebrate not just the union of Tessa and Finn, but the power of a woman who refused to let others define her worth." Behind the cameras, I could see the production team monitoring social media. One of them held up a tablet showing the viewer count, 3.2 million and climbing. "Before we begin the vows," the officiant continued, "Sadie would like to say a few words about the bride." Sadie stood up, her voice carrying clearly over the ocean breeze. 6 months ago, I was trapped in an abusive marriage, convinced I was worthless, that I deserved nothing better. Then I found RiseHer, and more specifically, I found Tessa." The cameras zoomed in on her face. "Tessa taught me that we don't have to accept the stories other people write about us. She showed me that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who damage us the worst, and she proved that we can rewrite our own endings. Sadie looked directly at me. Today, watching you walk down this aisle, surrounded by people who truly love you, marrying a man who sees your worth, this isn't just your wedding. This is hope for every woman who's been told she's not enough. The applause was thunderous, both from the guests and, I imagined, from the millions watching online. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Riley calling. I declined the call and handed my phone to Lisa. "No more interruptions," I said. "This moment is mine." Finn squeezed my hands. "Ready to become my wife?" "I'm ready to become myself." The officiant smiled. "Then let's begin with the vows." "Tessa, would you like to go first?" I looked out at the ocean, at the cameras broadcasting my joy to the world, at the people who had chosen to celebrate with me. Somewhere, in a ballroom across the state, my sister was probably still crying in her expensive dress, surrounded by empty tables and broken dreams. But here, on this cliff, in this moment, I was exactly where I belonged. "I do," I said, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. The hotel bar was dimly lit, filled with the scattered remains of what should have been Riley's wedding reception. Guests huddled in small groups, some still in their formal wear, others having changed into casual clothes. The atmosphere was thick with confusion and whispered gossip. Riley sat at a corner table, still in her wedding dress but with mascara streaked down her cheeks. Meredith paced nearby, phone pressed to her ear, her voice getting shriller with each call. "I don't care what the contract says," Meredith snapped into the phone. "We had a deal. You can't just cancel everything because of some legal paperwork." Jerome slumped at the bar, tie loosened, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one day. He nursed a whiskey while scrolling through his phone, probably looking at job listings. "This is a disaster," Riley whispered to her maid of honour. "Everyone's posting about it. The hashtag #weddingfail is trending, and half the comments are about Tessa." "What about Tessa?" her friend asked. "She got married today too, same day, and apparently it's all over social media." The bartender reached for the remote, turning up the volume on the large-screen TV mounted above the bar. "Sorry folks, someone requested we put on the live stream. Big wedding happening up the coast." The screen flickered to life, showing my clifftop ceremony in full HD. The sunset backdrop, the elegant flowers, the intimate gathering of people who actually wanted to be there. Riley's gasp was audible across the bar. "Is that?" someone whispered. "Oh my God," another guest said. "That's Tessa, Riley's sister." The camera zoomed in on me as I stood at the altar, radiant in my simple dress, holding Finn's hands. The happiness on my face was unmistakable, genuine in a way that Riley's forced smiles had never been. "Turn it off," Riley said, her voice cracking. But no one moved. The entire bar was transfixed, watching as the officiant spoke about empowerment and self-worth. The viewer count in the corner showed 4.1 million people watching. Meredith ended her call and stared at the screen, her face going pale. "That's our money," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "That dress, that venue, those flowers, that's all paid for with Riley's wedding money." "Actually," Jerome said from the bar, not turning around, "it's paid for with Tessa's divorce settlement, the money you stole." "We didn't steal anything," Meredith snapped. "I had legal access to that account." "Wire fraud is still wire fraud, even if you have the password." On screen, Sadie was giving her speech about finding strength through Rise Her, about learning to rewrite your own story. The camera panned across the audience. Successful women, supportive friends, chosen family. "She planned this," Riley said, her voice hollow. She knew our vendors would cancel. She knew Jerome would—" She looked at him accusingly. "Where were you this morning? You were supposed to help me get ready." Jerome finally turned around. "I got fired yesterday, Riley. Anonymous tip about workplace harassment. Funny thing is, the evidence they provided was incredibly detailed. almost like someone had been documenting everything for months. The pieces clicked together for Riley. She destroyed your career too. She didn't destroy anything, she just stopped covering for me. On the TV, I was speaking my vows. The audio was crystal clear, my voice steady and strong. For too long, I believed that love meant accepting less than I deserved. I thought family meant loyalty, even when that loyalty wasn't returned. I thought marriage meant losing myself to make someone else comfortable. The bar had gone completely silent, everyone watching. But you taught me that real love sees my worth, celebrates my strength, and wants me to shine brighter, not dimmer. You showed me that I don't need anyone's permission to claim my happiness. Riley started crying harder. She's talking about us, about our family. You chose Jerome over me, I continued on screen, looking directly into the camera. You chose your image over my well-being. You chose your comfort over my truth. And in doing so, you taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, that I am the only person responsible for my own happiness. Meredith sank into a chair. Everyone's watching this. Everyone's going to know. Know what? Jerome asked. That you stole your daughter's divorce settlement? That you enabled an abusive marriage? That you spent 34 years convincing Tessa she wasn't worth loving? I never said that. You said it yesterday, in the bridal shop. Tessa recorded the whole thing. The colour drained from Meredith's face. On screen, the ceremony was reaching its climax. Finn was sliding a ring onto my finger, tears streaming down his face. The sunset behind us was spectacular, the ocean waves providing a natural soundtrack. By the power vested in me, the officiant announced, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Tessa, you may kiss your groom. The kiss was soft, genuine, full of promise. The guests erupted in applause. The camera pulled back to show the full scene, the clifftop setting, the celebrating crowd, the pure joy on everyone's faces. Then the screen split. On one side, my wedding celebration continued. On the other, a news ticker appeared. Rise, her wedding breaks livestream records. 5.2 million viewers and climbing. Riley's phone started buzzing with notifications. She looked at the screen and her face crumpled. What is it? Meredith demanded. Someone posted a video, Riley whispered. It's Mom in the bridal shop saying Tessa doesn't deserve love. It has 2 million views already. The bar erupted in murmurs. Guests started pulling out their phones, searching for the video, sharing it with others. The caption says, "This is why some people choose their own family," Riley continued reading, and all the comments are supporting Tessa. On the TV screen, I was walking back down the aisle as a married woman, Eliana and Finn on either side of me, my face glowing with happiness. The camera caught me looking directly into the lens for just a moment, and I smiled, not smug, not vindictive, just genuinely, radiantly happy. She won, Riley said quietly. She actually won. Jerome raised his glass in a mock toast. To Tessa, the only one of us who figured out how to write her own ending. The screen faded to black, but the damage was done. In hotel bars and living rooms across the country, millions of people had just watched me claim my happiness while Riley's crumbled in real time. And for the first time in my life, I was the sister everyone was talking about for all the right reasons. The morning after my wedding, I sat in our hotel suite overlooking the Pacific, still in my silk pyjamas, scrolling through my phone while Finn made coffee. The notifications hadn't stopped. Messages, emails, interview requests, brand partnership offers. My wedding had broken the internet, but more importantly, it had broken the chains that had held me down for 34 years. Look at this, I said, showing Finn my screen. Rise, her gained 500,000 new followers overnight. Eliana says we've had more empowerment story submissions in 12 hours than we usually get in a month. And how do you feel about that? I considered the question. Proud, like maybe something good came from all the pain. My phone rang. Lisa. "Please tell me you've seen the news," she said without preamble. "What news?" "Turn on Channel 7, now." Finn grabbed the remote and flipped to the local news station. A reporter stood outside the courthouse, microphone in hand. "Federal investigation into wire fraud charges." Meredith Willis was arrested early this morning after evidence surfaced of illegal financial transfers totaling over $150,000. The screen showed footage of my mother in handcuffs being led to a police car. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her usual armour of righteous indignation. The victim, who wishes to remain anonymous, provided recorded evidence of the defendant admitting to using emergency banking access to transfer funds without permission. If convicted, Willis faces up to 20 years in federal prison. Finn muted the TV. "Are you okay?" I stared at the screen, watching them replay the footage of Meredith's arrest. I didn't think they'd actually prosecute her. "You gave them a recorded confession of wire fraud. What did you think would happen?" My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Riley. Please call me." I showed it to Finn. "Do you want to talk to her?" "Not particularly. But I'm curious what she has to say." I called the number. "Tessa, thank God." Riley's voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. "Mum's been arrested. They're saying she could go to prison." I heard. "You have to drop the charges. Please, she's our mother." "She's your mother. She stopped being mine the day she told me I didn't deserve love." "She didn't mean it. She was just stressed about the wedding." "Riley, stop." "Just stop." I walked to the window, looking out at the ocean where I'd gotten married 12 hours ago. "She meant every word. You know she did. And so did you when you sat there and let her say it." Silence on the other end. "What do you want me to do?" Riley finally asked, her voice small. "I want you to grow up. I want you to take responsibility for your choices. I want you to stop expecting other people to fix your problems." "But what about Mum? What about her? She committed a felony." "She stole my money to fund your fantasy wedding, and when it all fell apart, she blamed everyone but herself. Those are consequences, Riley, something you've never had to face before." "And Jerome?" "What about Jerome?" "He's broke, unemployed. He's been staying on my couch, but I can't. We're not even together. We were never together. The whole engagement was fake." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean, fake?" "There is no Michael. There never was." Jerome suggested the fake engagement after his divorce was finalised. He said it would help him get over you, and I thought it would make me look desirable. We were going to call it off after the wedding, but then Mum offered to pay for everything with your money, and it seemed easier to just go through with it. I sat down hard on the bed. "You faked an engagement to make yourself look good? And to hurt you. I'm not going to lie about that. I was jealous that you got such a big settlement, and I wanted to prove that I could have what you couldn't." "A fake marriage funded by stolen money?" "Yes." The honesty was jarring. Riley had never been honest about anything in her life. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm tired, Tessa. I'm tired of pretending, tired of competing, tired of being Mum's perfect daughter. Do you know what she said to me yesterday when the vendors started cancelling? She said it was my fault for not being grateful enough, that the universe was punishing me for taking you for granted." I almost laughed. "And what did you say?" "I said she was right. For the first time in my life, I told Mum she was wrong about something, and it felt—" She paused. "It felt like breathing." My phone beeped with another call. Eliana. "Riley, I have to go." "Wait. Tessa, I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't blame you. But I need you to know, watching you walk down that aisle yesterday, seeing how happy you looked, how free you looked, I've never been that happy, not once in my entire life. That's not my fault. I know, it's mine, and Mum's, and maybe Jerome's, but mostly mine." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, for all of it. I'm sorry I wasn't the sister you deserved." The line went quiet. "Riley?" Yeah. Get some therapy, real therapy, and stay away from Jerome. He's toxic for everyone he touches. I will. And Tessa, congratulations on your wedding. You looked beautiful. I hung up and answered Eliana's call. How's married life? She asked. Complicated, but good. Good, because I have news. 3 major networks want to interview you. 2 publishers are interested in your story. And we've been approached about turning Rise Her into a documentary series. I looked at Finn, who was listening with raised eyebrows. What do you think? I asked him. I think you've spent your whole life being invisible. Maybe it's time to be seen. I walked back to the window, looking out at the endless ocean. Somewhere out there, my mother was sitting in a jail cell. My sister was facing the wreckage of her fake life. My ex-husband was unemployed and homeless, and I was married to a man who loved me, running a company that helped women find their strength, with a story that was inspiring millions of people to rewrite their own endings. Eliana, set up the interviews, all of them. Really? Really, but I have one condition. What's that? I smiled, thinking about that little girl who used to throw tantrums when Riley got something she wanted, who grew up believing she wasn't worth loving, who spent 5 years married to a man who made her feel invisible. I want to dedicate everything to the women who are still walking on eggshells, still accepting less than they deserve, still believing other people's stories about who they are. Done. What's the message you want to send them? I looked at my reflection in the window, hair messy from sleep, no makeup, wearing pyjamas that cost less than Riley's fake engagement ring. But I was glowing with something I'd never had before, the absolute certainty of my own worth. They planned my ending. So I rewrote it, and this time the bride walked herself home. Finn came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Ready for the rest of our lives? I leaned back against him, watching the sun rise over the water where I'd claimed my happiness in front of 5 million witnesses. I've been ready for years, I just didn't know it yet. My phone buzzed with another notification, another interview request, another opportunity to tell my story. But I turned it face down and focused on the view, on my husband's arms around me, on the life I'd built from the ashes of everything they'd tried to take from me. Some stories end with forgiveness, some end with reconciliation. This one ended with me, finally, choosing myself. And that was the most beautiful ending of all.
My name is Savannah Reed, and I learned I wasn't invited to my sister's wedding while standing in a fluorescent-lit bakery aisle, holding a box of lemon bars I'd promised to bring to Sunday dinner. A cousin had posted a photo from a bridal boutique lace, champagne flutes, my mother's hand on my sister's shoulder, and the caption read, "Family only." I stared at the screen long enough for the lemon bars to sweat through the cardboard. A pulse rose behind my ears. Not loud, just steady, like a metronome marking everything I'd pretended not to hear. I typed Chloe's name into the search bar and found nothing. I typed my mother's and got the same. Somewhere between last week and this afternoon, I'd been unfollowed, untagged, uninvited. A clerk asked if I needed a bag. I said no and left the lemon bars on the shelf. Outside, the wind lifted the corner of a deflated graduation banner on the hardware store across the street, the year peeling away. I didn't cry. I didn't write a paragraph to plead my case. I opened my Maps app and searched flights leaving tonight. If they were drawing a circle without me, I didn't need to stand at its edge. At home, I set my keys on the counter with more care than necessary, as if the sound might shatter something fragile inside me. The apartment was still, the kind of quiet that made you notice your own breathing. I dropped my purse on the chair by the window, the one that caught afternoon light, and for a moment I just stood there, watching dust motes drift in the beam. I called my mother first. The line rang once before switching to voicemail her chipper holiday message, the one where she promised to call right back. She didn't. I didn't leave a message. I didn't trust my voice not to betray more than I wanted her to hear. Next, I scrolled to Chloe's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I already knew how that would go. She'd answer with that calculated sweetness she used when she wanted the upper hand, and I wasn't going to give her that stage. Instead, I opened our old thread, the one filled with recipes, inside jokes, and photos of the two of us before everything curdled. The most recent message was mine, a simple happy birthday from 2 months ago, left on read. The silence of those read receipts was louder than any slammed door. I moved through the apartment, pulling the suitcase from the hall closet. It still smelled faintly of sunscreen and sea air from a trip I'd taken last summer. I set it on the bed and unzipped it, if they wanted family only. I could give them distance in a way they hadn't anticipated. Folding clothes became a kind of meditation, soft cotton, worn denim, the navy sundress I hadn't worn in years, but couldn't bring myself to give away. Each piece I packed felt like a quiet decision. I would not stand outside a closed door waiting for it to open. By the time the sun dipped below the neighboring rooftops, the suitcase was full. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, searching flights out of the city, somewhere warm, somewhere that didn't carry their shadows in every corner. The screen lit up with options, rows of departure times that felt like escape routes. I didn't know exactly where I'd go yet, but I knew I wouldn't be here when they toasted Chloe in a dress I'd never see in person. And that choice, cold, clear, deliberate, felt like the first real breath I'd taken all day. The decision settled over me like the click of a lock. Once it was made, everything after was just logistics. I booked a one-way ticket to Key West, leaving at dawn. It wasn't the kind of place I'd ever pictured myself. Too bright, too easy, but maybe that was the point. I called Ethan next. He answered on the second ring, voice warm and a little amused, like he'd been expecting this call. "Savannah," he said, drawing out the syllables. "Tell me you're finally ready to use that +1. Ethan and I had met 2 years ago at a charity gala where I'd been covering the event for work. He'd been impossible to miss. Sharp suit, sharper mind, a way of making everyone in the room feel seen. We'd kept in touch, sometimes crossing paths in different cities. Our friendship threaded with a quiet pull neither of us had tried to name. "I'm going to Florida tomorrow," I told him, "and I don't want to go alone." There was a pause, the soft sound of pages turning in the background. "Good," he said finally. I was getting tired of waiting for an invitation. We didn't talk about Chloe. I didn't need to explain the why. He seemed to understand there were some wounds that weren't for display. Instead, we talked flights and hotels, about the little beach villa he knew overlooking a strip of sand no tourist brochures ever mentioned. He'd arrange everything, he said. I just had to show up. After we hung up, I moved through the rest of my evening, like someone following a map they'd drawn themselves. Dinner was an afterthought, a leftover salad, a glass of wine I didn't finish. I set out my passport, my sunglasses, the sandals I always forgot I owned. Before bed, I opened social media one last time. Chloe had posted a photo of her engagement ring, the caption some recycled quote about soulmates. The comments were full of hearts and champagne emojis. I stared at it until my phone dimmed, then set it face down on the nightstand. Tomorrow, I'd be somewhere else entirely. Somewhere the air smelled like salt instead of old resentments. Somewhere Chloe's shadow couldn't reach. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. The airport was still half asleep when I rolled my suitcase across the polished floor, the wheels clicking softly over the seams between tiles. Dawn light spilled through the tall windows, painting everything in pale gold. I wore oversized sunglasses, not for disguise, but for the comfort of looking out without anyone looking in. Ethan was waiting at the gate. He stood when he saw me, that easy smile settling across his face like it belonged there. He took my suitcase without asking, his hand brushing mine in a way that felt unhurried, deliberate. "You travel light," he said, glancing at the single carry-on. "I'm not planning to come back with baggage," I replied. and the corner of his mouth lifted. The flight passed in quiet conversation and long stretches of silence that didn't need to be filled. Somewhere over Georgia. He leaned closer, voice low enough that it felt like a secret. I booked us the villa, private pool, chef, and a view that will make you forget every bad thing anyone's ever said to you. When we landed, the air hit me like a warm hand on the back, humid, salt-sweet, alive. The drive to the villa wound along narrow roads lined with palms, the ocean flashing between breaks in the trees. The place itself was a study in understated luxury whitewashed walls, wide windows thrown open to the sea, a deck where the horizon looked close enough to touch. Ethan handed me a glass of something cold and citrusy. "To being somewhere they can't find you," he said. We spent the afternoon by the water. I let the sun press against my skin, felt the knots in my shoulders begin to loosen. Ethan swam slow laps in the pool, pausing to float and watch the clouds. We didn't talk much about home, but when we did, it was in small fragments enough to acknowledge the damage without letting it dictate the day. As evening fell, he made dinner, grilled fish, fresh vegetables, a bottle of wine that tasted like summer itself. We ate on the deck, the sound of waves filling the spaces between our words. Somewhere far away, Chloe was probably finalizing table settings and playlists. Here, there was only the rhythm of the tide, the slow unwinding of a life I hadn't realized was wound so tight. The second morning, I woke to the scent of coffee drifting in from the kitchen and the muffled hum of Ethan talking on the phone. His voice carried that low, confident tone he used in business, measured, unshakable. I lingered in bed, letting the sound of the ocean filter through the open windows. For once, I wasn't waking up braced for a message from my family, or a call I didn't want to take. The phone on my nightstand was silent, face down, just the way I'd left it. When I stepped out to the deck, Ethan handed me a mug. "I have a surprise," he said. "We're going out on the water." The boat was sleek and white, with a shaded deck and cushioned benches that seemed designed for lingering. The captain, a sun-browned man with an easy grin, nodded to Ethan with the familiarity of someone who'd worked for him before. We sailed past quiet coves and stretches of untouched shoreline, the kind of places you only found if you already knew where they were. I could feel the knots in my chest loosening with each mile we put between us and the mainland. Halfway through the trip, Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket, not a ring box, but something sturdier, lined in dark velvet. Inside was a gold compass, the kind that looked like it belonged to another century. My initials were engraved on the back, "So you never lose your way again," he said simply. The gesture hit harder than I expected. It wasn't about romance, not in the obvious sense. It was about being seen, about someone recognizing that I'd spent years navigating a family who treated me like an afterthought. We anchored in a secluded bay and swam until the water turned that deeper shade of blue that signaled evening was coming. When we finally headed back, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and rose, the reflection rippling across the water. I didn't check my phone once that day, but that night, curiosity pulled me in. Chloe had posted a picture of her bridal shower champagne flutes, pastel dresses, a caption about being surrounded by love. I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone aside. I wasn't ready to look at their world yet, not until I had something far better to show them. By the third day, the idea had stopped feeling like an escape and started feeling like a choice. I wasn't hiding in Key West anymore. I was living here, on my terms. Ethan noticed it too, how my shoulders stayed relaxed, how I laughed without the edge I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. That morning, we walked through the open-air market downtown. The air was thick with the scent of grilled seafood and ripe mangoes. Street musicians played slow jazz, while vendors called out over the hum of conversation. Ethan bought me a wide-brimmed straw hat from a woman who swore it was impossible to look bad in. We sat at a small cafe shaded by bougainvillea. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then slid it face down on the table. "Business can wait," he said, though the flash in his eyes told me it wasn't small business at all. I sipped my iced coffee, watching him. "You always turn it off that easily for the right reasons." "Yes," he said, his gaze steady. "And you're one of them." In the afternoon, we returned to the villa to find a courier waiting with a sleek black envelope addressed to me. Inside was an invitation gold-embossed, heavy cardstock Chloe's wedding, with a handwritten note, "Still hoping you change your mind." I almost laughed. It wasn't an olive branch, it was a performance, something she could show others and say, "See? I tried." Ethan read it over my shoulder. "You going?" he asked lightly, though I caught the calculation in his tone. "Not like they think," I said. That evening, over dinner on the deck, we began to sketch out an idea. It wasn't about crashing her wedding, not in the dramatic, movie scene way. It was about showing up in a way that couldn't be ignored, a way that rewrote the story they'd been telling about me for years. Ethan had the connections, I had the timing, and together, we had the kind of subtlety my family would never see coming until it was already happening. By the time the moon rose, the plan was set in motion. I didn't know every detail yet, but I knew the feeling I wanted them to leave with the quiet, unmistakable realization that I had never needed their approval to live a life worth envying. We gave ourselves 2 more days in Key West before setting anything in motion. Ethan said it was for logistics, but I think he knew I needed the space to breathe, to sharpen the edge of what was coming. On the first of those days, we chartered a small seaplane to one of the outlying islands. The flight was only 15 minutes, but it felt like leaving the world entirely. The sand there was white as bone, the water so clear I could see stingrays gliding along the bottom. We swam, we walked, we said almost nothing. It was the kind of silence that builds resolve. That night, back at the villa, Ethan made a few calls from the balcony. He didn't bother to hide the fact that they weren't casual conversations. I caught bits names I didn't know, arrangements being confirmed, flights being scheduled. When he came back inside, he handed me a slim folder. Inside were travel confirmations, a designer gown receipt, and a set of hotel reservations in Miami for the same weekend as Chloe's wedding. Not at the wedding venue. Of course, but close enough. "I thought we weren't crashing it," I said. "We're not," Ethan replied. "We're redefining proximity." The second day was slower. We wandered along Duval Street, stopping in art galleries and picking out a painting, a watercolor of a lighthouse, that I knew I'd take back home as a reminder. Over lunch, Ethan asked me exactly how I wanted that weekend to end. I thought about it for a long moment. "I want them to see me happy," I said finally, "not in a way they can dismiss as luck. I want it to look inevitable, like I was always going to end up this way, no matter what they did." Ethan smiled, and I knew he understood perfectly. That night, I packed my suitcase with deliberate care. Everything I chose had a purpose, colors that would stand out without shouting, jewelry that caught the light just enough. This wasn't about being flashy. It was about being undeniable. When I zipped the bag shut, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not bitterness, just a clean, precise anticipation. We landed in Miami 2 days before the wedding. The city buzzed with the kind of restless energy that felt charged, like it was conspiring with me. From the balcony of our suite, I could see the ocean on one side and the skyline on the other, 2 worlds colliding in glass and light. Ethan had arranged for fittings the moment we arrived. The gown was midnight blue silk, cut to move like water when I walked. Understated, but impossible to ignore. The tailor adjusted the hem while murmuring that it commanded a room without ever raising its voice. I smiled. That was exactly the point. The night before the wedding, we attended a charity gala at a historic hotel just a few blocks from Chloe's venue. The guest list read like a who's who of business, politics, and art. Ethan knew half the room. The other half wanted to know him. I moved through the crowd on his arm, catching snippets of conversation, his name, my name, questions whispered just low enough to be polite. Cameras flashed. A society columnist asked for a photo for the Sunday edition. I gave her one, tilting my head just enough that the light caught the sapphire pendant at my throat. The morning of the wedding, Chloe's event flooded my social media feed. Her dress, the flowers, the sprawling venue. I didn't post anything, not yet. Instead, Ethan and I took a slow breakfast at the hotel, letting the timing stretch. Our plan wasn't to walk into her ceremony. It was to arrive at the adjoining rooftop bar, where half the guests would filter in afterward. From there, the overlap would happen naturally, people seeing us, recognizing us, connecting the dots faster than she could rewrite them. As I applied my lipstick in the mirror, I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn their approval. That chapter was over. This wasn't about them accepting me. It was about them realizing they no longer had the power to define me. And as Ethan offered me his arm, I knew by the end of the day they would. The rooftop was alive with chatter when we stepped out of the elevator. Strings of lights hung overhead, the late afternoon sun casting everything in gold. Conversations stilled for just a moment as eyes turned toward us, Ethan's hand steady on mine, the silk of my dress catching the light with every step. It started quietly. A bridesmaid recognized Ethan first, her expression shifting before she leaned in to whisper. Then it spread. Names murmured, phones pulled out, headlines confirmed. Within minutes, half the terrace knew exactly who we were. Chloe saw me from across the space. Her smile faltered mid-sentence, the glass in her hand trembling slightly. She didn't cross the room, and I made no move to close the distance. Instead, I let the pause stretch, letting the whispers do what I didn't have to. One by one, people approached old family acquaintances, neighbors I hadn't seen in years. Their greetings were polite, but their eyes held something new: curiosity, perhaps even a hint of respect. I returned each smile like it cost me nothing. When Ethan suggested we leave, I agreed. We walked out slowly, the low hum of conversation trailing us. I never looked back at Chloe. I didn't need to. Back in the quiet of our suite, I stepped onto the balcony. The city sprawled before me, lights beginning to glitter against the coming night. For the first time in years, I felt entirely free of the weight of their approval. Revenge hadn't needed to be loud or cruel. It was simple, precise and unshakable truth, shown in a way they couldn't deny. I was already living a life they could never give, and could never take away. And that was more than enough. My name is Mia Peterson, and the night my sister got married, my father's hand left more than a sting on my face. It left a line I would never let them cross again. The Whitaker estate was strung with gold lights and white roses, the air thick with champagne and money. I'd stepped into a side room to escape the noise when they followed me and my parents, the new in-laws, and Tessa in her gown, bouquet trembling. Eleanor Whitaker, all pearls and posture, smiled like she was doing me a favor. We'd like to use your helicopter for their grand exit. Just a quick hop over the bay to Montauk. It'll be magical. I leaned back against the marble mantel, keeping my voice even. It's an aircraft, not a party prop, and it doesn't leave the hangar without my authorization. My mother's smile thinned. My father's eyes hardened. You'll do it for your sister, he said, stepping in close. No, I told him. One word, clean as glass breaking. The crack of his palm came before I could blink. The sound bounced off the paneled walls and carried into the hall, where a couple of guests froze mid-conversation. I saw the flicker of a phone camera before it vanished. I didn't touch my cheek, didn't give them the satisfaction of flinching. I walked past the stunned faces, through the French doors, into the salt air. The music and laughter behind me blurred into a single, distant hum. If they wanted a spectacle, they had one, but not the kind they'd planned. And as I crossed the gravel drive toward my car, I knew exactly what I'd protect and how far I was willing to go to make sure no one took it from me again. The highway back to Bay Bridge felt emptier than it should on a wedding night. I drove with the windows cracked, letting the late summer air pull the heat from my skin. The taste of salt lingered, sharp as the look in my father's eyes before his hand came down. By the time I reached the airport gates, the party lights and string quartet waltzes were miles behind me. North Shore Air's hangar sat at the far end of the tarmac, its floodlights washing the asphalt in a pale gold. My Bell 429 rested beneath her cover, like a prizefighter between rounds, silent, self-contained, ready when I was. I keyed in my access code, the keypad beeping in its usual friendly tone, and slid the hangar doors open just enough to slip inside. The air smelled of metal and machine oil, a scent I'd come to associate with control. I walked the perimeter out of habit, running my fingers along the cool curve of the fuselage. Even under canvas, I could picture every polished rivet, every inch of cream leather inside. People see a helicopter and think of extravagance. I see the years it took long shifts in someone else's cockpit, medical runs and storms that turned the sky to soup, ferrying executives at dawn while the rest of the city slept. Every invoice I sent, every inspection I passed, pulled this machine a little closer into my life. Tonight, it was more than my livelihood. It was a line in the sand. The office phone rang once and went silent. Seconds later, my operations manager, Nadia, texted, "You good fine. Lock the schedule." I wrote back. Her reply came fast, a single check mark, and, "Proud of you." I pocketed the phone and leaned against the desk, letting the quiet settle. Out on the runway, a jet's landing lights flared and faded. Somewhere in the hangar's steel bones, the night wind whistled, low and steady. Tessa's face flashed in my mind, eyes flicking away, when Eleanor laid out the plan, as if I weren't standing there. They'd built the evening around an aircraft they didn't own, counting on me to play along. The old reflex urged me to smooth things over, make it easy. But the smell of fuel and the hum of the building reminded me this was mine, and tonight had proven just how quickly they'd take it if I let them. I closed the hangar doors and heard the locks click into place. The sound was small, but it felt like armor. The next morning, sunlight slid between the blinds of my office, catching on the stack of flight logs I'd left out. I hadn't slept much every time I closed my eyes. The scene replayed Eleanor's smooth voice, Tessa's silence, my father's hand. By mid-morning, I was running pre-flight paperwork when Nadia stepped in, holding her coffee like a peace offering. "You should see this," she said, setting her phone on my desk. A forwarded email was open, the kind you don't want to stumble across before your second cup. It was from a luxury event planner in Manhattan to one of our mutual contacts. Attached were 3 high-resolution photos of my Bell 429, one in the air over the bay, another on the tarmac with my company logo in full view, and a close-up of the interior. The caption read, "For the bride and groom's Montauk arrival. Champagne service included." No one had asked me for these photos. No one had permission to use them. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Friend of a friend," Nadia said. "Apparently, the Whitakers have been pitching your helicopter as part of their wedding experience for weeks." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle like bad weather on the horizon. They hadn't just assumed they'd sold the idea, and now there was an entire guest list expecting it. Nadia watched my face. "What do you want to do?" I thought about the guests with cameras last night, the way gossip travels in circles like theirs. One wrong move, and the story wouldn't be about my boundaries. It would be about me ruining a moment. But boundaries aren't worth much if you abandon them when they're inconvenient. "First," I said, "change every access code. Hangar, gate, fuel lock, today." She nodded. "And the flight schedule, lock it down. Nothing moves without my written sign-off." By the time she left, my decision was set. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about making sure no one family or not treated my work like a stage prop again. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. When she answered, I didn't waste time. "Jessica, I need a formal no-access letter drafted. Address it to Daniel Peterson, Tessa Peterson, and Eleanor Whitaker. Make it very clear any attempt to enter my hangar or operate my aircraft will be treated as trespass." Her laugh was short, without humor. Sounds like you're drawing a line. Not drawing, I said, reinforcing. Jessica moved fast. Within hours, she emailed me a draft so direct it might as well have been chiseled in stone. I read every word twice, picturing each recipient unfolding it and realizing, maybe for the first time, that access to my aircraft was not theirs to grant. I signed it, scanned it back, and told her to send hard copies by courier. By late afternoon, the courier had confirmed delivery. The silence that followed was almost satisfying. No calls, no texts, just a heavy pause in the usual hum of obligation. That evening, I drove back to the hangar. The setting sun had turned the tarmac into a sheet of copper, and the Belle's white and silver skin gleamed beneath the floodlights. Mark, the hangar manager, was waiting with a new set of access cards and a printed list of updated codes. "You weren't kidding," he said, handing them over. "Not even a little," I replied. We walked the perimeter together, checking every door and gate. It wasn't paranoia, it was prevention. Once we'd finished, I climbed into the cockpit. The interior smelled faintly of leather, and the cedar I'd used to keep the cabin fresh. My fingers rested on the collective lever, not to start the engine, but to remind myself that control was mine, in every sense of the word. I sat there for a few minutes, the quiet wrapping around me. This was the same machine that had carried trauma patients to safety in bad weather, flown CEOs into Manhattan before sunrise, and taken me on solo flights when I needed to think. Now it was also the symbol of something bigger, the right to say no. Before locking up, I checked the new security system motion sensors, door alarms, the works. If anyone tried to get cute, the alert would hit my phone before they even touched the rotor blades. Driving home, I passed the turnoff for Harbor Ridge, somewhere beyond those hedges and gated drives. They were likely scrambling, rewriting their precious timeline. I wondered if they'd even told Tessa's guests the helicopter was never theirs to promise. I didn't slow down. The road ahead was clear, the air cool through the open window. They'd made their play, I'd made mine. And unlike their plans, mine didn't require anyone else's permission to work. 2 days later, the first cracks showed. Nadia slid a tablet across my desk. A gossip site's homepage already loaded. There, under a grainy headline photo, were Tessa and her new husband stepping out of a black SUV in Montauk, faces tight. The caption read, "High society couple arrives late to gala after unexpected travel change. They sat in traffic for nearly 2 hours," Nadia said, her tone caught between sympathy and satisfaction. Missed the opening speeches. Apparently, people were expecting a much grander entrance. I scrolled through the comment speculation, snide jokes, whispers about cut corners. None of it came from me, but it didn't need to. In their world, perception moved faster than fact. Later that week, word reached me about another cancellation. This time it was a waterfront charity auction Eleanor had bragged about for months. Their plan, apparently, had been to ferry a handful of high-profile donors from Manhattan directly to the venue by air. Without the helicopter, the logistics fell apart. They lost their deposit and, worse for them, face. I didn't gloat. This was never about humiliation. It was about proof. Proof that the line I'd drawn wasn't a bluff. On Friday afternoon, my phone lit up with Tessa's name. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "You're making us look ridiculous," she said, skipping any greeting. "I'm protecting my property," I replied. "That's my job. This is family, Mia. You're acting like someone who worked for what she has and won't let it be treated like a rented limo." I cut in. "You'll figure out another way." She went quiet for a beat, then hung up. I set the phone down and turned back to the window. On the tarmac below, a corporate charter I'd approved that morning was lifting off, its blades catching the late afternoon light. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Clients respected contracts, boundaries, and the fact that access was earned. Family, on the other hand, had treated my work like a given. That was the real divide, not money, not machinery, but respect. And once you've seen who respects you only when it benefits them, it's hard to unsee it. The calls from my parents came next. First, my mother, her voice sugary in a way that always meant she was about to ask for something. "Mia, honey, this has gotten out of hand. People are talking. Do you really want your sister's first weeks of marriage clouded by this?" "This," I repeated. "You mean me not giving her something she never asked me for directly?" She sighed, the sound sharp in my ear. "You know how these circles work. Appearances matter. They matter to you," I said. "What matters to me is keeping what I've built from being used without my consent." She muttered something about me being stubborn and hung up before I could answer. 2 days later, my father tried a different tactic. "You've made your point," he said, as if this were a game I'd agreed to play. "Now it's time to let it go. We'll arrange something for the Whitakers, but it would be better if you cooperated before more damage is done." Damage to what I asked? Their reputation or my willingness to roll over when you tell me to? He didn't like that. I could hear it in the clipped goodbye that followed. By the end of the week, Nadia brought me news that made it clear this was bigger than a wedding snub. A tech company the Whitakers had been courting pulled out of a joint venture, citing instability in project execution. She'd heard from a friend in the industry that the helicopter fiasco had been mentioned in the decision process. "They're bleeding credibility," Nadia said, "and they're too proud to admit it started with assuming you'd go along." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like I'd finally tested the strength of my own boundaries and found they held. That night, I stayed late at the hangar. The Belle sat gleaming under the overhead lights, her rotors still. I ran my hand along the cabin door, thinking of all the places she'd taken me, places I'd chosen, on my schedule, under my terms, outside. The wind pushed against the hangar walls in slow, even breaths. It sounded less like a warning now, and more like agreement. For the first time in years, I felt completely in command of where I was headed. The following week, a thick envelope arrived at my office cream paper, embossed return address. Inside was an invitation to a family reconciliation luncheon at a downtown hotel, signed by my mother in looping script. No mention of the wedding. No mention of the helicopter. Just an airy promise that we can find common ground. I almost tossed it, but part of me wanted to see if they'd say out loud what I already knew. The private dining room was all white linen and crystal water pitchers. My parents sat at one end of the table, Tessa in the middle, twisting her napkin. Eleanor Whitaker was absent a sign. Maybe that this was meant to be just family. We started with polite noise about the weather. Then my father leaned forward. "Mia, we admit we should have asked you directly. That's not an apology," I said. Tessa's eyes darted to him, then to me. "We only pushed that night because we knew you'd say no otherwise. We thought, maybe if we asked in front of people, you'd feel pressured to agree." There it was, the quiet part, finally spoken out loud. Jessica's voice echoed in my mind. "Once they admit intent, you'll never unhear it. You didn't respect my answer. I told them. You turned it into a spectacle to get what you wanted. That's not how this works anymore." My mother's jaw tightened. My father glanced at the waiter, as if the presence of a stranger might make me soften my stance. It didn't. We finished the meal in brittle silence. I stood first, left enough cash for my share, and walked out into the bright afternoon. The air felt clearer out there, away from their careful scripts and old power plays. They'd wanted me to bend for the sake of family. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't cut them out. I'd simply stepped out of reach, and from where I was standing, that distance was the most honest thing between us. A year later, that distance was still intact. The Whitakers had faded from the charity pages. My parents kept to their circle in Harbor Ridge. We crossed paths only at events where avoidance was easy. North Shore Air, on the other hand, had never been busier. We'd landed contracts with a renewable energy consortium, a medical transport network, and ironically, a high-profile conservation group that had heard about my uncompromising operational standards. Their director had said it like a compliment, which I suppose it was. One crisp October morning, I lifted off from Bay Bridge with a corporate client in the back, the Bell's twin engines humming steady. The city unfolded beneath us in sharp autumn light bridges like silver threads, the harbor alive with cargo ships. It struck me then that I'd built a life where every takeoff was mine to decide. When we landed back at Bay Bridge, Nadia was waiting on the tarmac, hands tucked into her jacket. "You've got a visitor," she said, tilting her head toward the hangar. Tessa stood just inside the open doors, her coat a size too big, hair pulled back in a simple knot. She looked smaller somehow, not in height, but in presence. "I'm not here to fight," she said when I approached. "I just wanted to see it. The helicopter. What you've done with all of this." I let her walk beside me as I showed her the bell, the maintenance bay, the new scheduling system. She asked questions not about borrowing, but about how things worked, what it took to keep them running. At the end, by the hangar doors, she hesitated. "I can't undo what I did, but I understand now why you said no." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was closer than anything I'd heard before. She left with a small wave, and I stood in the quiet she'd left behind, the bell gleaming under the lights, some storms. I'd learned, you weather head on. Others, you simply hold your ground and let them pass. Either way, I was still standing exactly where I chose to be. Winter settled over Bay Bridge with a clean, salt-edged cold. From my office window, I could see the bell on her pad, rotors still, white skin catching the pale light. Every contract on my desk had my signature alone. Every flight on the schedule was there because I allowed it. The distance from my family no longer felt like a wound, it felt like a boundary. One I'd built, reinforced, and learned to live inside without apology. They'd stopped calling. I'd stopped wondering if they might change. North Shore Air kept growing. New clients, bigger projects, a staff that respected the rules because they knew I stood by them. In quieter moments, I thought about how easily I could have said yes that night at the Whitaker estate. How different things might look if I'd let the pressure win. But saying no had been the truest thing I'd done in years. It hadn't just protected an aircraft, it had protected the life I'd fought to build. The freedom to decide where I was going and who came along. On a clear afternoon, I rolled the bell out into the winter sun, climbed into the cockpit, and felt the hum of power rise under my hands. The sky was wide open, mine to navigate, and this time, no one else was holding the map. My name is Brianna Torres, and I am standing in a military courtroom where my father is trying to strip me of everything my mother left me. The air smells faintly of old wood and floor polish, and every sound seems to echo boots shifting, papers sliding, a pen tapping somewhere behind me. Across the aisle, my father sits at the plaintiff's table, perfectly composed in his tailored navy suit, the corners of his mouth curved just enough to tell me he thinks he's already won. Beside him, Judge Gerald Vance leans back in his chair, his eyes drifting between my father and me with the kind of familiarity that isn't supposed to exist in a courtroom. Each ruling so far has fallen in my father's favor, and every objection from my attorney has been swatted away like a fly. They think I'm cornered. They think all I have left is to sit quietly and watch them dismantle my name, my record, my claim to the one piece of my life my father doesn't control. But they're wrong. I wait until the room stills, until I can hear the hum of the lights above. Then I rise, step toward the microphone, and let two words cut through the air like a blade. Iron Spectre. Judge Vance's pen stopped mid-scratch. A subtle twitch crossed his jaw before he masked it. But I saw it, so did the uniformed officer sitting near the aisle, who suddenly shifted his weight like he'd just been given a silent order. I stayed where I was, letting the echo of those words ripple through the gallery. My attorney, Captain Miller, didn't move either. He knew we'd reached the part of the plan that couldn't be rehearsed. Vance cleared his throat, trying to recover. "Commander Torres, this tribunal is concerned with your fitness to inherit, I'm aware," I said evenly, my voice steady but low enough to make the room lean in. So was the task force the night Iron Spectre went live. The name hung there. You could almost feel the air compress, the same way it does right before a storm front breaks. In the second row, a civilian in a charcoal suit pulled a phone from his pocket and stepped toward the door without waiting for permission. My father shifted in his seat, and for the first time all morning, his expression wavered. The smug certainty slipped just enough for me to see the unease underneath. 3 years ago, Iron Spectre was stamped across the top of a mission packet that came to me already smelling wrong, satellite images too clean, weather logs that didn't match the timestamps. I'd requested a delay, twice, and been denied, twice. The operation had gone forward anyway. We'd walked into a perfect kill box. 6 of my people didn't walk out. That phrase had been buried deep, classified beyond most clearances. But it was tied to names and decisions Gerald Vance could not afford to see dragged into daylight. He tried to speak again, but movement at the rear of the courtroom drew his attention. 2 officers from the Department of Defense entered through the side door, their uniforms crisp, expressions unreadable. One went straight to the clerk's desk. The other leaned down to whisper something in Vance's ear. I didn't smile. I didn't move, because I wasn't there to beg for fairness. I was there to remind them that fairness had nothing to do with what came next. Vance's gavel rapped once, twice, the sound sharper than before. "We will recess for 30 minutes, he announced. And just like that, the game they thought they were playing was over. The moment the gavel struck, the room fractured. Lawyers gathered their papers with forced calm, eyes flicking toward the side doors. Uniformed officers exchanged glances, heavy with unspoken recognition. My father leaned toward Vance, whispering with the urgency of a man who realizes his position is no longer as solid as he thought. I stepped back from the lectern, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Each step was deliberate, giving me time to watch the shift in their faces, first confusion, then calculation, and in something closer to fear. Captain Miller didn't speak to me. He just gave a small nod, the kind that said, "We've drawn blood. Now we wait." In the hallway outside, the air was cooler, carrying the scent of disinfectant and machine oil from somewhere deeper in the building. I found a quiet corner, near a row of vending machines, and let my thoughts drift to the night everything had changed. Black Rook. That was the mission they'd renamed and buried, under enough red tape to strangle the truth. The op order had painted it as a straightforward hostage recovery, 2 aid workers, 1 foreign national scientist. But the intel package was too neat, the imagery too clean. My requests for a reconnaissance delay had been dismissed as hesitation. We went in at dusk. The first door gave way too easily. The second opened into silence, thick enough to set every instinct on edge. A burst of gunfire came from an angle no one expected. And in seconds, chaos erupted. My team was good better than good, but no amount of skill can undo an ambush designed from the inside out. 6 names, 6 folded flags, 6 families who would never hear the truth. I'd carried that weight through my resignation, through the quiet stares in the grocery store, through my father's cold avoidance. He'd never once asked me what really happened. He didn't want the truth. Truth was inconvenient. Truth got in the way of maintaining his standing in the retired officer's circle. Now the same truth was coiled between us like a live wire, waiting for the right hands to pick it up. I heard the echo of boots in the hall, not rushed measured. The kind of stride that meant someone was coming who didn't need to hurry to be obeyed. I straightened. The next move wasn't mine anymore. The door at the end of the corridor opened, and 2 men in dark suits entered. The kind whose lapel pins said more than any introduction could. One carried a slim folder tucked under his arm. The other scanned the hallway with the detached precision of someone trained to notice what most people miss. They didn't come to me. They went straight to the bailiff, spoke in low tones, and then disappeared through the side entrance to the judge's chambers. The bailiff's eyes followed them until the door shut. Then he glanced my way for a fraction of a second before moving on. I could feel my father's presence before I saw him. Marcus Torres had a way of filling space, shoulders squared, chin up, gaze steady, like he was always in uniform, even when he wasn't. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the fine stitching on his tie. "What did you just do?" His voice was tight, clipped, the kind you use when you're holding pressure on a wound. I met his eyes without blinking. "By the time you understand it, it'll be too late to undo." A flicker crossed his face, something between frustration and caution. He glanced toward the courtroom doors, where Vance still hadn't emerged. "You think this changes the outcome? It already has," I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the space between us. I could see him trying to read me the way he used to before approving a young officer's promotion, searching for weakness, for hesitation. When he didn't find it, his tone shifted, almost pleading. "You could have handled this like family, Brianna." I let the words hang there, unchallenged, until I finally answered. "Family handled it when Mom wrote her will. You ignored that order." His jaw tightened. He hated being spoken to in the language of command. Before he could respond, the side door opened again. The men in suits reappeared, accompanied by a woman in dress whites, whose rank alone would silence most rooms. Her presence shifted the air immediately, like a weather front pushing in. She looked directly at me. "Commander Torres, we're resuming. Now." And in her voice, I heard it authority that didn't belong to the judge or my father, authority that could end this. When we re-entered the courtroom, the atmosphere had transformed. The low murmur of conversation was gone, replaced by a taut silence that stretched from the gallery to the bench. Judge Vance's seat was empty. In his place stood the woman in dress white's shoulder boards gleaming, medals catching the overhead light. She waited until every eye was on her before speaking. "Be seated." Her tone was measured, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. The clerk rose. Admiral Catherine Hale, presiding under delegated authority from the Office of the Secretary of the Navy. I heard my father's breath catch. He masked it quickly, but his posture betrayed him. Marcus had built his life on knowing the players, predicting their moves. Hale wasn't part of his map. She set a stack of folders on the bench, opened the top one, and began. "This matter is dissolved in its current form. All filings associated with docket 1947 are now classified. Parties will surrender notes and unofficial copies to the bailiff for secure disposition." The ripple through the room was immediate, pens set down, folders snapped shut, conversations aborted mid-sentence. Hale didn't wait for the noise to settle. The tribunal convened on a petition challenging the fitness of Commander Brianna Torres to inherit under a private will. She continued, "The petition relies on characterizations of operational conduct that are not accurate within the record now before me. Effective immediately, the United States Navy withdraws support for any proceeding that relies on that narrative." It wasn't loud, but it was final. My father inhaled sharply, then let it out through a clenched jaw. His eyes darted to Vance's empty seat and back. "Furthermore," Hale said, turning a page, "the court orders immediate restoration of contested assets to the beneficiary, named in the will of Isabella Torres." My mother's name, spoken in that clear, unwavering voice, cut through me more than I expected. I sat straighter, letting the moment settle. Hale closed the folder, her gaze sweeping the room one last time. "This session is concluded under seal." She tapped the stack of folders into a neat square and handed them to the bailiff. The gavel fell once. The sound wasn't Vance's sharp crack. It was steadier, heavier. It was the sound of something ending, and something else beginning. The benches creaked as people rose. Papers were gathered in silence, movements clipped and efficient, as if everyone was afraid to disturb the air Admiral Hale had left behind. I stayed seated for a moment longer, watching my father. He hadn't moved. His hands rested on the table, fingers splayed, as though holding on to something that was no longer there. When I finally stood, the bailiff was already approaching to collect documents from our table. Captain Miller handed over his neatly organized files without a word. The bailiff placed them into a locked case and snapped it shut. The metallic click echoed louder than it should have. In the corridor, the sound of voices returned in small bursts, officers speaking in low tones, footsteps pacing toward elevators, the mechanical hum of air vents overhead. I stepped aside to let a group pass, and that's when my father caught up to me. "You've made a mistake," he said, his voice low, almost calm. "Maybe," I replied, keeping my tone even, "but it's mine to make." He studied me, searching again for some angle he could work. "I took that money to protect our name. I kept the truth buried so you'd have a future." I met his gaze, refusing to look away. 6 people are dead because someone decided their lives were expendable. You helped cover for that. That wasn't protection. It was self-preservation. A shadow crossed his face, the briefest sign of something like regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Before he could respond, a young lieutenant in plain clothes appeared at my side. "Commander?" "Admiral Hale would like a word." I nodded and followed, leaving my father standing in the hallway, his shoulders stiff, his eyes fixed somewhere past me, on a future he no longer controlled. Each step toward that closed door felt like walking deeper into a place my father couldn't reach. The conference room Admiral Hale had claimed was windowless, lit by the steady hum of fluorescent bulbs overhead. A carafe of untouched coffee sat on a side table, its glass fogged. Hale stood at the far end, her jacket unbuttoned, one hand resting lightly on the folders she'd carried from the bench. She didn't waste time on small talk. "Judge Vance isn't your problem," she said. "He's a symptom. Someone higher used him to keep certain files, buried files, tied to Operation Black Rook." Her eyes stayed on me as she spoke, measuring my reaction. I didn't give her much, just a slow nod. "We have fragments," she continued. "Altered imagery, suppressed human intel, a hostile source inserted into the chain as friendly. The compartment that handled it existed on paper for 6 months, then disappeared. I'd suspected as much for years, but hearing it confirmed settled something cold in my chest. Names. "Not yet," she said. "If I give them to you before the warrants are signed, the doors close and the files vanish. But I can tell you this one of them is still active, and his signature matches 2 other compromised operations." I leaned against the table, folding my arms. "And what do you want from me? Your memory," Hale replied. "Every anomaly you flagged before the launch, every denial you got, every decision you made that night, in your own words, and something else you'll need to be steady. They'll try to paint you as vindictive, using grief to settle scores. Precision is the only thing that keeps this from turning into theater." Her tone was clipped, but there was no condescension in it. I met her gaze. "I can do precise." She gave a single, sharp nod. "Good. Because we're not just cleaning up after Black Rook, we're finding the hand that fed you into it, and when we pull it into the light, you can't lose yourself in the moment. Justice, not spectacle." I pressed my thumb against the scar in my palm, feeling the faint ridge beneath the skin. "Justice," I said. Hale gathered her folders. "Then we begin today." And just like that, the path forward shifted not away from the fight, but deeper into it. When I left the conference room, the hallway felt narrower, the air heavier. My father was gone. Only the faint scent of his cologne lingered, a reminder of his talent for disappearing before anyone could pin him down. Captain Miller was waiting near the elevators. He didn't ask what Hale had said, just fell into step beside me. "You'll have to sign a non-disclosure," he murmured. But from the look on her face, "I'm guessing you're not done here. I'm just getting started." I said. We walked out into the late afternoon light. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Somewhere in the distance, a flag snapped in the wind. The next morning, I stood at Arlington, the damp winter grass soft under my boots. 6 headstones in a row, each one carved with the words known unto God, my team, my responsibility. From my pocket, I took the small leather pouch I'd carried for 3 years. Inside were 6 smooth stones, each one taken from the field where we'd fought, cleaned but never polished, one by one. I set them at the base of each headstone, speaking their names quietly: Morales, Kent, Bishop, Rivas, Talcott, Harlow. When I reached the last grave, I held the stone longer, feeling its cool weight. Harlow's stone. He'd pushed me forward that night, taken the blast instead. I set it down gently, my fingers lingering on the grass. A shadow fell across me. Admiral Hale stood a few feet away, her hands clasped behind her back. "You kept your promise," she said. I told them I would. We stood there in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. "Finally," she said, "I'm putting together a team. Off the books, fully sanctioned, but invisible. I need someone who knows the difference between a mission and a suicide run. Someone who sees when the intel doesn't fit. You want me to lead it, yes." I looked back at the stones. "And if I say no, you walk away," she said simply. "But you know what's still out there, and you know they'll keep doing it unless someone stops them. The choice wasn't really a choice. I have conditions," I said. "I pick my own people. I get direct comms to you, no middle layers. And my team's families get real benefits: housing, education, medical care, whether we make it back or not." Her mouth curved just slightly. "Done." I nodded once. "Then I'm in." That night, in my apartment, I opened the folder she'd given me. The first name on the list was someone I knew, Staff Sergeant Brooks, brother of Morales. The second, a former EOD Tech Price's cousin had told me about years ago. Every name had a thread to the 6 I'd buried. Not replacements, but people who understood the cost. Echo Vigil. That's what we'd call ourselves. And we were going hunting. 2 weeks later, I drove to my father's house for the last time. The curtains were drawn, the driveway empty. I didn't knock. In his study, the desk was as immaculate as ever, papers aligned, pen placed just so. From my pocket, I took a single stone, darker and rougher than the ones I'd left at Arlington. I set it in the center of his desk, without a note, without explanation. He'd understand. It wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't a threat. It was a marker of what had been lost, and what could never be bought back. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. The next morning, I stood in a secure briefing room with my new team, the map of our first operation lit on the wall. My gaze moved over the red markers, each one a step toward the truth behind Black Rook. For the first time in years, I felt something close to steady. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking back the right to tell the truth and making sure no one else walked blind into a trap designed by the people meant to protect them. Justice wasn't finished, and neither was I. I'm Autumn Mitchell, and I arrived 17 minutes late to the Whitmore estate, with the taste of metal still in my mouth from running the last block. The foyer was a mirror of polished oak and strangers' eyes. My sister's voice cut through before the door even closed behind me. "Late again. Autumn, some habits don't die." I kept my coat on for a beat longer than polite, steadying my breath. The chandelier hummed. Someone cleared a throat. I could still smell the street on my hands, rubber, cold iron, the faint oil from a wheelchair axle that wouldn't turn until I coaxed it back to life on the curb outside. A butler gestured toward the dining room. I followed the sound of silver against china and stepped into a hall washed in warm light. At the far end of the table sat a man with a soldier's posture and a stillness that made conversation falter. He was turning a small coin between his fingers, the edge flashing as it caught the chandelier's glow. My lungs forgot how to work. The coin was mine. The man was the stranger I'd knelt beside on the sidewalk only here. Everyone was waiting for his word, and he was my fiancé's father. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, printed on thick cardstock that smelled faintly of cedar, as if the Whitmores wanted their wealth to be tangible, even in the paper. I'd tucked it into the side pocket of my work bag, unsure if I'd actually go. Family dinners at my sister's fiancé's home weren't exactly my comfort zone, not when the last gathering had ended with her announcing in front of 20 guests that I wasn't built for real success. But then the follow-up call came from my sister, Celeste. Her tone was sweet enough to rot fruit. She reminded me of the dress code, the start time, and that she'd arranged for me to sit where you'll be comfortable, which I knew meant out of the spotlight. The way she lingered on comfortable made me imagine a seat near the kitchen door. I should have declined. Instead, I'd said yes, because there are moments when you can feel the ground shifting under you, and you know you have to be there to see why. The morning of the dinner, work had run late. I left the office already knowing I'd be cutting it close. And then, 3 blocks from the estate, I saw him, a man in a tailored coat, slumped forward in a wheelchair. One wheel bent inward. People skirted around him, glancing, muttering, but not stopping. I knelt, introduced myself, and got to work. My hands came away black with grease, the cold biting my knuckles. The wheel snapped back into place with a stubborn click. He thanked me quietly, voice low and clipped, as though measuring each word before giving it away. When I offered to walk him somewhere, he shook his head, flicked a coin from his pocket into my palm, and disappeared into the crowd before I could protest. By the time I reached the Whitmore estate, my palms were still faintly smudged, my hair windblown. The butler's eyes lingered on my coat before he led me in. Celeste was waiting in the foyer, one eyebrow arched. 17 minutes late, she murmured, loud enough for the guests in the next room to hear. Some of us respect other people's time. I didn't answer, because past her shoulder, at the head of the table, the man from the street sat in quiet command, coin in hand, eyes already on me. He looked different under the chandelier's gold light, but the stillness was the same. There was an authority about him that didn't need to be spoken, shoulders squared, spine straight, gaze steady. His eyes locked on mine for a second longer than was casual, and I felt the air in the room shift. Celeste swept forward, looping her arm through mine with a grip that felt more like control than welcome. Autumn, this is our father-in-law-to-be, Mr. Whitmore, she said brightly, though her voice wavered at the edges. He's early tonight. Mr. Whitmore didn't move. We've met, he said simply. The murmurs around the table stilled. My future mother-in-law tilted her head. Curious. Oh, when I opened my mouth. But Mr. Whitmore spoke first. She stopped for me on Whitaker Street, helped fix my chair. His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was weight behind it, as though this single act had filed me under a category no one else at the table could touch. Celeste's smile thinned. Well, that's nice, she managed, pulling me toward my seat. As I slid into place, I noticed it wasn't tucked near the kitchen door at all. It was 2 chairs away from Mr. Whitmore himself. Dinner began with the usual small talk, weather, travel, mutual acquaintances. I answered when spoken to, keeping my tone even. But each time I glanced up, Mr. Whitmore's eyes were on me, as if he were cataloging my responses. Halfway through the second course, he set his fork down and turned toward my fiancé. Daniel, you've chosen well, he said, his voice carrying enough that the far end of the table went quiet. This one doesn't measure time in minutes. She measures it in what she gives away. A faint heat crept up my neck. Celeste stared at her plate, stabbing at a roasted carrot as though it had wronged her personally. The rest of dinner unfolded in muted tones. The earlier edge to the conversation blunted. Still, I could feel the undercurrent, my sister's discomfort, my fiancé's curiosity, Mr. Whitmore's quiet assessment by dessert. I knew 2 things for certain. Whatever this dinner had been meant to prove about me had shifted entirely. and my sister was already plotting how to take back control. Celeste's laughter was sharper than the clink of crystal as she leaned toward Daniel's mother, whispering something that made the older woman's lips press into a thin, polite line. I caught fragments late, unreliable, always a story. It was a familiar play. Celeste didn't confront me outright. She seeded the room with quiet doubts, letting them grow in other people's minds until they bloomed into assumptions. I'd seen her do it at family reunions, work events, even our cousin's wedding. But this time, she was forgetting one thing. Mr. Whitmore was still at the table, and unlike the rest, he wasn't playing along. When the coffee arrived, he cleared his throat, the sound pulling every gaze toward him. "Autumn," he began. "Do you know why I was on Whitaker Street tonight?" I hesitated, unsure if it was a test. "I don't," I admitted. "I was there to meet someone who decided they were too busy to wait when I was delayed." His eyes slid briefly to Celeste, so I sat, and I waited for the kind of person who notices the person everyone else walks past. The room was silent enough to hear the soft hiss of the coffee being poured. Daniel looked between us, brow furrowed. "You're saying I'm saying she passed a test tonight without knowing it," Mr. Whitmore said. "Not one I set for her, but one she set for herself by the way she lives." Celeste's hand tightened around her spoon. "We all help people when we can," she said lightly, though her knuckles were white. He didn't respond. Instead, he leaned back, studying me with the same quiet intensity as on the street. It wasn't admiration exactly, it was something heavier, as though he'd made a decision about me that no one else could undo. For the rest of the evening, the conversation bent subtly in my direction. Questions about my work, my views, my background. I answered, keeping my voice steady, but inside, I could feel Celeste's glare like a heat lamp. She hated losing the center of attention, and tonight she'd lost it to me. As the guests began to leave, Mr. Whitmore asked Daniel and me to stay. His tone wasn't a request. It was the opening move of something I didn't yet understand. The dining room had emptied, leaving only the faint scent of coffee and the low hum of the chandelier. Celeste lingered near the doorway, pretending to gather her things, but her eyes tracked every movement. Mr. Whitmore waited until the last coat disappeared through the front door, before speaking. "Daniel, could you give me a moment with Autumn?" Daniel glanced at me, uncertain, but I nodded. He pressed my hand briefly before stepping into the hall. Celeste hesitated, but Mr. Whitmore's next words were firm, "Alone." She bit her lip, then turned sharply on her heel. He gestured toward the chair beside him. "Sit!" I obeyed, my pulse quickening. He rested his hands on the table, fingers steepled. "You didn't know who I was when you stopped for me." "No," I said. "You looked like you needed help." That was enough. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "That's rare. Most people only move when there's something in it for them. You didn't ask for my name, my story, or my gratitude. You just acted." I shifted in my seat, unsure how to respond. "I built my life in boardrooms where people only pretend to care," he continued. "It's made me value those who act without calculation." Tonight, I saw someone try to diminish you before the meal even began. I also saw you hold your ground without lowering yourself to their level. The words landed heavier than I expected. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "I protect the people who prove they deserve it. You may need that protection sooner than you think. There are things about this engagement that may not be what they seem." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He straightened, glancing toward the doorway, where faint voices murmured, "Not here. But when the time comes, remember what I've said, and remember that you already have an ally." Before I could ask more, Daniel returned, followed closely by Celeste, who wore the brittle smile of someone trying to mask irritation. Mr. Whitmore rose, offering me his arm as we walked toward the door. It was an old-fashioned gesture, but in that moment, it felt like a shield. Outside, the night air was cool, but my mind was burning with questions. The ride home was quiet, Daniel's hand resting over mine, as if he could feel the questions building under my skin. Streetlights passed in golden blurs, each one catching the edge of his profile. I wanted to ask him right then what his father had meant, but something in his expression told me it wasn't the moment. When we reached our apartment, Daniel set his keys on the counter and poured 2 glasses of water. "You were incredible tonight," he said finally. "Dad doesn't warm up to people easily. What you did, it mattered to him. I wasn't trying to impress him," I said, taking the glass. "I know. That's why it worked. Still." His words didn't erase the unease curling in my chest. "Daniel, your dad said there are things about this engagement that may not be what they seem. Do you know what he meant?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm he did. "It's complicated. My family, Celeste especially, had ideas about who I should marry. They thought they could push you out. Tonight proved them wrong. But that doesn't mean they'll stop." The honesty was both comforting and alarming. "So this isn't over?" "No," he admitted. "But you're not alone in it." Over the next week, I began to notice small shifts, conversations that stopped when I entered a room, emails that took longer to be returned, subtle comments from Celeste about fitting in. I'd seen this pattern before in my own family, the way exclusion could be dressed up as concern. Then came the first real crack. Daniel was out of town on business when I received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was polite but cool, identifying herself as an investigator working with one of Mr. Whitmore's corporate security teams. She asked if I was available to meet sooner rather than later. We arranged for the following afternoon at a quiet cafe. I arrived early, scanning the room for anyone who might be watching. When the investigator walked in, her expression was calm but direct. She slid into the seat across from me, placed a slim folder on the table, and said, "What I'm about to show you concerns your safety and your future with the Whitmore family." The folder sat between us like a live wire. I didn't reach for it immediately, sensing that she wanted to set the stage before I saw whatever it contained. "My name is Karen Holt," she said, her voice low enough that the hum of the cafe nearly swallowed it. "I work in corporate investigations. Your fiancé's father asked me to look into some unusual activity, financial, and otherwise surrounding the Whitmore family." I frowned. "And this involves me," how Karen's eyes softened. "But only slightly. Because you're now part of the picture they're trying to control. There have been moves to discredit you quietly, at first. Rumors seeded in the right ears. Background checks stretched beyond what's legal. Even surveillance." A cold weight settled in my chest. "Surveillance." She nodded. "They want leverage, and if they can't find it, they'll try to create it." Karen finally nudged the folder toward me. "Inside are preliminary findings. Some of what's here involves your sister-in-law-to-be, Celeste. Some involves others. It's not my place to interpret it for you, but I will say this: be careful who you trust." I opened the folder. Photographs, transaction records, notes in clipped, impersonal handwriting. One image stopped me, cold Celeste, seated at an upscale restaurant with a man I didn't recognize. A thick envelope sliding across the table. "She's been funneling information to a competitor in exchange for money," Karen said quietly. "That's not just a betrayal of the family, it's potentially criminal, and she's framed you in at least one of those exchanges." The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Karen's tone sharpened. "Mr. Whitmore believes you need to be prepared for what's coming. He asked me to tell you that if you're willing to act, he'll stand with you. But the choice has to be yours." I closed the folder, my pulse steadying into something colder. "Tell him I understand, and tell him I won't wait for them to make the first move." Karen gave a short nod, slid a card across the table, and left without looking back. I sat there for another 5 minutes, committing every detail of the photographs to memory. The next call I made wasn't to Daniel. It was to Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore's voice was calm when he answered, as though he'd been expecting my call. Autumn, he said. I take it Karen's visit was enlightening. That's one word for it, I replied. I'm not going to sit quietly while they try to dismantle me. Tell me what you need me to do. There was a pause, then the faintest trace of approval in his tone. Be at the Whitmore estate Friday night. We're hosting a family dinner. And bring the folder. Friday arrived like a storm I'd been walking toward. Daniel was back in town but seemed unaware of the undercurrent. I didn't tell him everything, only that I'd be at the dinner. His easy smile told me he thought it would be a reconciliation. I let him believe that. The estate glowed in the winter dusk. Every window lit, every corner of the long driveway lined with expensive cars. Inside, the dining room was set to impress crystal, silver, and an arrangement of white lilies down the center. Celeste was already there, in a gown that looked like it had been tailored that morning, her smile as sharp as glass. Dinner began politely enough, the conversation skimming over travel plans and stock updates. Mr. Whitmore kept his counsel at the head of the table, his fork barely touching the food. I followed his lead, waiting. Halfway through the main course, he set down his wineglass. There's something we need to discuss as a family, he said, his voice carrying just enough weight to still the room. Celeste's eyes flickered toward me, suspicion sparking. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the table between us. Perhaps you'd like to explain these before dessert, I said evenly. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Mr. Whitmore didn't look at Celeste. He looked at the man seated beside her, the same one from the photograph. We'll be having guests join us in a moment, he said. Investigator Holt, if you would, the double doors opened. Karen entered, trailed by 2 uniformed officers. Celeste's smile finally cracked. The room froze the instant Investigator Holt stepped through the double doors. 2 uniformed officers flanking him. Their boots made no sound on the marble, yet with each step, the air seemed to tighten. Celeste's fork slipped from her hand, the metallic scrape slicing through the stillness. This is a formal warrant, Holt said, placing a thick folder on the table. His voice was calm, controlled. Celeste Whitmore, you are under investigation for fraud, coercion, and falsifying financial statements. The table seemed to stop breathing. Daniel's hand halted halfway to his glass, his gaze darting between me and his father. At the head of the table, Mr. Whitmore didn't move, except for the slow, deliberate turn of a small coin between his fingers, the faint chime of metal against skin the only sound. Celeste tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in her throat. This is ridiculous, it's all here, I said, my tone steady as I tapped the folder I had placed earlier. Every transfer, every message, every threat. The officers moved in, chairs scraped against the polished wood. Somewhere, a guest muttered a prayer. Celeste's protest disintegrated beneath the sharp final click of the cuffs. I didn't look away, not when she passed me, not when her eyes searched mine for mercy. There was nothing left to give her. When the doors closed, silence reclaimed the room. Daniel's voice broke it. You could have told me. I could have, I said. But then you'd have to choose before you knew the truth. Mr. Whitmore rose, setting the coin on the table with a soft clink. Dinner's over. Autumn, walk with me. Outside, the winter air cut cold against my skin. But my chest felt lighter. I had imagined this moment would taste like victory. Instead, it was calm, steady final. It had never been about revenge in the end. It was about ending the lies so I could finally live free of them.